Hello and welcome to the studio. I'm Peter Stojanovic and this is Tomorrow's Workforce and the Technology Talent Gap. Thank you all for joining me today. Conor, I'm going to come with you first with that first critical question. New workforce-ish, new needs, pandemic a couple of years ago. We've got Generation Z coming into the fore too, all with different expectations. Have you noticed, first of all, those different needs come to the fore? And if so, what are you doing about it at Experian?
Well, the answer is yes, for sure. A number of perfect storms seem to have happened at the same time with Brexit, pandemic, the macroeconomic environment that we find ourselves in, and a really tough environment to hire people at the moment. So we're looking at our workforce. We've adopted fully hybrid as our model in Experian. And with that, we have some people that are truly 100% remote and some people that are more inclined to come to the office on a more regular basis. But on average, we've said a 40 or 50% return to the office for the workforce. But we've allowed the flexibility across each team. So we've tried not to have a diktat across the whole organisation and give some flexibility to the teams and say, figure out what works for you and share that information, because I think we're all still learning, is the honest answer.
So lots of communication.
Lots of communication, using lots of many different virtual platforms.
Katie, Experian's gone hybrid. Is that the same with your company?
Yeah, pretty much. Although a lot of the people that we hired during COVID were remote hires, which actually helped. Because being central London based, the challenge is hiring and getting that talent in London, and salaries was becoming very problematic pre-pandemic. So actually having the flexibility of being able to hire people who live anywhere in the UK, or people who could then say, actually, I'd like to work for you, but I don't need to live in London anymore. I'm going to go and live in the wilds of Wales, has actually worked quite well. So we are hybrid, but actually quite a few of our people who we've hired have come in as fully home-based. We try to get people together fairly regularly, just for, come to the office for a day, let's just meet up, let's spend a bit of time together. But a lot of the tech teams I've found have actually found it relatively easy to work together remotely. We're now at the point as well where we're through a couple of recent acquisitions. We've got teams in parts of Europe. So obviously people aren't going to be together anyway. So that sort of concept of all the stand-ups, all the kind of regular ceremonies and meetings are generally happening virtually anyway, even if a few people might be around the table. But yeah, we've actually found it sort of helped in that way, and in the flexibilities definitely kind of opened up a new market to us. But I think there's certainly a lot of other challenges facing us as we go forward, and that's really just the lack of skills, which I think we're going to talk about soon.
Yeah, we will definitely talk about that talent gap and the lack of skills, but just focused on your setup, do you see that setup, that hybrid, moving forward long term?
I think so, for sure. We've got offices all over the UK. The sort of core technology team was largely based up in Leeds anyway. I'm based in London. I've got some of my team here, but people are, they wouldn't go to one office and find everybody there anyway. So I think it's been challenging to encourage people to come back when they come in and they might not see anyone from their team anyway. So in other parts of the organisation, it works better because, they're all sort of based around one office and can regularly meet up. But yeah, I think for sure we will retain that hybrid model and where possible, allow individual flexibility. I think it's just become the norm and accepted, and it accommodates people's personal needs, family requirements, shared childcare responsibilities, all of that sort of thing just makes all those things much more flexible.
You're right that there's different experiences with different teams. Danny, from your side, different industry to Conor and Katie, what have you seen, I suppose particularly from that new cohort Gen Z experience that you presumably have a lot of?
Well, I'm at London Business School, so it's a graduate business school, generally young, a little bit older than the undergraduate universities. So we have a classroom first policy. The students didn't really enjoy learning over Zoom. They're paying a lot of money to do these postgraduate courses and they didn't want to be online. So we've shifted our business model to classroom first and on campus. But then what happens to our staff? Well, the ones that need to be customer facing have to be on site. And then the others, well, it's kind of up to them. We certainly came out of the pandemic stipulating 2 days a week on campus, 3 days a week, it's up to you. And we just found that we were just having far too many conversations about, are you spending 2 days a week? Are you spending enough? We're not talking about the important stuff here. So you're all adults. You decide where you want to be, whatever works for you. And yeah, we've tried to, some events are in person, some events are hybrid, some events are exclusively online. I'm not bold enough to try and predict the future of how the future will work. We've got amazing professors doing that at the business school. But I think we, as technologists, have to supply the capabilities to be hybrid and then work our way around that over the coming years.
Yeah. And that's a good point. As technologists, your role is defined within this theme as bringing in the solutions and the strategies to help the company adapt, basically. And there are some things you won't adapt to. So, Katie, Conor, from your side, were there anything that happened in the last 2 years that you didn't adapt to, or consciously said, no, we're going to refuse that position, we're going to refuse that request because, as a technologist, this isn't the right thing to do?
Go on, Katie.
Well, I suppose we're in the education business, and similar to you in that some of our particular higher education establishments, we sort of have needs. We have to get students in the classroom. We bring in a lot of international students. It's part of the funding rules require them to actually come to a campus and attend in person. That sort of works, and especially now, obviously things have settled down a lot. That's sort of working quite well. I think one of the things we've struggled with, and certainly I'm quite against, and when we talk about hybrid working sort of in a normal day-to-day, I think that's okay, but hybrid learning has been very challenging, and we've just experienced this morning the challenge of trying to get people remote and people in a room. And we've found that learning experience for both the trainer and the delegates very poor if you've got a mixture. So what we've tried to say is, okay, we will run events, but the event will either be fully in person or fully remote, because it's just very challenging to try to engage with half the people on a camera and half the people in the room. So that's something that we've decided sort of strategically we're not going to continue to do. We will try to organise events that are either one or the other. And we expected to see more of a return to the physical classroom than we've seen. And certainly when you talk to learners, they would say they would rather be in the classroom than spending hours on a Zoom meeting or a WebEx or something. It's very challenging to learn in that way. But actually people, maybe it's the cost, maybe it's, I don't know, just the willingness of people to commit to so much time away. We have seen that most people are continuing to prefer virtual learning in the sort of workplace learning environment, for sure.
Yeah, very similar. I think the model is something that we're learning, whether it's all in the office or all working from home. When you have half and half, to your point, it's really tough. And I blame technology. The technology hasn't advanced fast enough yet to allow that fully immersive remote and in-person experience.
I agree, yeah.
Whereas, because the people in the office or the classroom, they communicate a lot faster, and the people online can't keep up with the conversation in the room. So our teams have self-selected to say either all in or all out, so to speak, and when they're running the meetings that would really need and command a collaborative group conversation. If it's learning, I think we are able to do that a bit more mixed and hybrid. But if it's a design session, a workshop session, then the teams have said, guys, we're either going to all be in or all be out.
Compounding those issues, both from a personal perspective and from a tech perspective, is this tech talent gap, which I think many of us are seeing. So just really quickly, what exactly effect has that had on your teams and your strategies? Dan, do you want to go first?
Yeah, so for me, we're not going out and paying the highest possible salaries to recruit the best possible engineers or the best possible talent out there, because we're competing with Microsoft, Google, even Tesla struggling to recruit AI engineers. So how are we going to get a chance of getting really great data scientists into our organization? So partly we accept that and say, how can we start at the other end? So working really hard on apprenticeships, apprenticeship schemes, people who are doing mid-career changes and retraining as software developers, finding the talent from within your organization and then training them up to be business analysts, data skills as well. Go back to apprenticeships, but we run data literacy apprenticeships for 5% of our entire workforce. So trying to cultivate the talent from within. And if we do need to bring in that top layer, we tend to use a consultancy or a contract resource for a kind of short, sharp, specific purpose, rather than just having them there all the time.
And on the flip side, has any organisations approached London Business School for you to act as a feeder for that talent? Maybe that they've identified you maybe as a source of talent for what they need?
Indirectly, yes. We're definitely getting pressure from employers to say, add more data skills into your training, basic coding skills into your training, sustainability knowledge and experience as well. So that you're creating more cultivated graduates.
Interesting. Conor, Katie, from your perspectives, maybe you go first.
Well, go ahead.
We took a step back a year ago and looked at our strategic workforce planning across the organisation and really tried to help us understand, what were our workforce demands, bake into that attrition rates, and attrition rates have increased over the last 12 to 24 months, and then the new demand that we had. And it really allowed us to look then and say, right, what resource do we want to buy in? What have we got to borrow in from our partners and third parties? What have we got to build ourselves? I think to Danny's point, looking at early careers and new talent coming into the organisation. And what are we going to bot? What activities can we automate? And we've been really clinical now on our strategic workforce planning and executing against those plans. And it's a multifaceted strategy now to fight on all fronts, because the one-dimensional approach we may have taken 2 or 3 years ago, it just isn't working today.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we're sort of in the business of solving this problem, but also I have the challenge in my own business. So in my team, I'm struggling to hire in key roles, in DevOps, in data, particularly. But, our organisation is about facilitating those. So it's great to hear you talking about apprenticeships and boot camps and return to work and career changes, because those are exactly the scenarios that we support through the programs we run. And, a lot of what we're trying to do, I think, is we all recognise that there's not enough talent of that sort of stereotypical person who goes into a career in tech. And a lot of the programs and schemes that are out there encourage people from different backgrounds and from different sort of places who may not have previously considered a career in tech. If we're relying on that sort of stereotypical group, there's just not enough of them for the number of people we need. We're doing something similar around working with some of the banks on retraining people who've worked in branch, for example, and helping them with getting into business analysis, technical support, data type roles, because some of those skills can be very transferable. And I think it's really great, because a lot of people, in the past, we'd have just gone, well, those roles are redundant now. Whereas we're seeing a lot of our customers being able to offer great career changes and great new opportunities for people in those kinds of roles. And you're obviously bringing people in at much lower salaries that you can then grow and build and kind of create those longer sort of strategic career development programs, as opposed to going to market and fighting the cream of the talent pool at the top that everybody wants, and they'll stay a year and then they'll go somewhere else, and they'll and they may be commanding the ridiculously high salaries, but they've perhaps worked 6 months in 5 places. Well, they haven't got that sort of real kind of business understanding. They're certainly not going to have your domain understanding and that kind of thing. So I think the great thing is there's lots of different ways of approaching it now. We still see businesses who aren't sort of thinking that way, but certainly in my team, we have a lot of apprentices. We bring in apprentices at the most junior levels through our service desk, bring them up through, and we've got people who are now data engineers, who are now software developers, we've got DevOps people, we retrain trainers to become part of the engineering team. So I think that you've got to have a much broader view than just ring the next recruiter and see what CVs they could send our way.
Daily conversations and getting them to understand the challenge and the opportunity to go, oh, well, we've not thought about it in that way, or how do we develop our brand? How do we attract different types of talent? But I think there's a really key point there. I certainly don't see this as a crisis and, oh my goodness, how am I going to fill this talent gap? I see this as a massive opportunity, not just to do all the things that you just mentioned about creating all these wonderful opportunities for people who are changing their skill set, but also the diversity of your team.
Yep.
So if you look at a team that has followed the kind of paths that we've talked about, you're going to get a significantly more diverse team in terms of gender, in terms of ethnicity and so on, than you would do if you just went down the same track and you want a developer with 10 years experience or a business analyst with 10 years experience. That would be quite homogenous.
And I suppose that might be the defining feature of tomorrow's workforce, if we can coin it that, that democratization of talent.
I think so, and I wonder whether the market will actually regulate itself in the next couple of years. The early movers, as I like to call them, that have tried to benefit from the salary hikes that we've all witnessed and experienced in this last 2 years, whether that will just level out in the next 12 to 24 months' time.
Well, interestingly, my next question was going to be, if that weren't the case, because you made a point about increasing use of bots and automation, that is a point of no return in a way. Once you start replacing jobs, no matter how complex, with an automated system, it'd be very difficult to persuade the CFO and the CEO to actually bring back an individual with a salary and complexity and all that kind of stuff. So once a company decides to go down that route, automated roles, how do you think the industry would develop? Do you think it would improve productivity? Do you think it would actually compound the issues around having individuals in charge of those strategies that you've in place? It might be sector specific, I'm sure, but is that something you have all thought about in your teams or in your strategies?
I think if an organisation isn't thinking about automation and cleaning up their data, they're not going to survive. So there's just the level of inefficiency that you're carrying by not having the right data, making the right decisions, and having really manual processes is just not sufficient. So there's that element that you can say, I'm not going to do any automation, but you're just not going to be there in the long run. The flip side of that is, where does this automation come from? Where does the design come from? Where does the technology come from? The theory is that by doing that, the people that you employ are adding value to your organization rather than just shifting bits of paper or bits of data around. And as a result, you're creating a more skilled workforce. That's why data literacy is so key, because you want to know not just how do you clean your data, but also how do you make the decisions that you're making. And I think that those are the opportunities. It's a much more interesting, it's a more engaging job. And there is more and more and more work to do to deliver that.
Interesting. You're nodding your head.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, obviously, we want to streamline, we want to be efficient, we want to clean up those manual tasks that don't add value, which sort of removes the layer, I suppose, of more manual task and lower skilled work. But somebody's got to write the code that does that. And, we're here in the capacity of technology leaders and technology sort of hirers and people worried about those resources. So for sure, we're going to need those anyway. I think the interesting thing is the technology workforce of the future will not just sit in the tech team. And what we're seeing, and I'm certainly seeing as we try to automate, streamline, introduce operational efficiency, is that, we're sort of starting to go, well, finance and operations are going, well, we need some data scientists, or we need some this and that. And, those roles will actually start to appear all over different parts of the organisation. I suppose the org structure of the future is an interesting one to think about, because, will the tech team be a tech team, or actually does technology take over the whole organisation and
Yes.
you end up, let's hope so. But I think it's, you must be thinking about it, as you say, you have to be looking for opportunities to automate, but I think probably not in our careers will the automation automate itself. I think, we're all sort of in the world where you still need people to analyse those business processes, define, design, build, test, deploy, support, run, maintain those systems that do that. And that's the sort of industry that we're all concerned about.
So actually, when we think about workforce, the future discussions, we really ought to be thinking also about the structure of the company, the blueprints by which things are run, and how that transforms with new talent. That's a really interesting point, Katie. Conor, I'm going to come to you next. Coming back then to some of the needs that we discussed early on in the conversation, the remote hybrid working, how does that trend with what we discussed around talent trends converge, if they do so at all, do you think?
Wow, where do I start with this one? I think the tech companies can really help us on this topic from my perspective. If hybrid's here to stay, and I genuinely believe it is, then how do we help organizations across all the different activities that we do to allow the remote hybrid model actually be more immersive, and whether that is the metaverse or the technologies that come into the forefront. But I think we've got to keep pushing the boundaries to allow organizations to have that flexibility. Our workforce love hybrid working. They equally love coming to the office and engaging with people. So I think that we just got to try and get the technologies to come in a bit more into the real world and engage with us and to experience life today, so they can help us. And I certainly don't think I'm doing enough at the moment to bring those organisations in to actually look at the environment and to see how we can make it better.
So reconfigure the office space, basically.
Absolutely reconfigure the collaboration spaces in our organisations. You don't come to the office to sit in front of a screen going on Teams or Zoom calls every day. You can do that from home. You're really coming to collaborate with your peers from around the organisation.
Interesting. Danny, from your side with your graduates, obviously a different viewpoint perhaps, not just the team that you head, but is that something that you're seeing discussing across the school, what they're going to be going into, what kind of jobs they're looking for, or what they're demanding perhaps, in terms of their new roles?
Yeah, and certainly the demanding starts at the beginning. As soon as they walk through our doors, they expect a technologically advanced, digitally literate organisation, which they don't always get depending on where they go, and those expectations continue more and more. I mean, just to elaborate on the collaboration spaces, we're establishing a kind of smart building strategy to link into AV, to link into how we work, to link into sustainability demands. How do we I suppose it's back to this hybrid point, is how do we put the data, the tools, the technology in place so that we can adapt to whatever the demands are at the particular point in time? Because the demands in December 2019 were very different to the demands in December 2020, for example, but we didn't see that coming. So it's ultimately, we even, as we go back to a classroom first approach, our professors are saying, great, so we can take the technology out of the room. It's like, no, we cannot. Talking about avian flu now, we can't take stuff out, but we need to make it disappear. We need to embed it so it's just completely natural. And that's the key, so that you can flex and you can adapt.
Yeah, and you've also got professors to teach as well.
Yes.
And Katie, I presume you've gone through that experience as well.
Yeah, and certainly I think, as you mentioned earlier, that the technology hasn't really advanced quickly enough in that sense. I mean, we still, every meeting, can you hear? You're on mute, or I can't see you on the big screen. It's every time, isn't it? Yeah. One of the things for us with trying to sort of think about the future of blended learning and kind of thinking about the right modalities for people to learn. So we offer a combination of digital self-paced and sort of classroom-led, instructor-led training for our kind of workforce learning. And as we're trying to put the mixture of those components together to make the sort of ideal learning experience, that virtual classroom is still very still-tiered, very kind of awkward, lots of gaps, can you hear, are you there? And how do we make that really interactive? We've got far too many tools, so we have to jump on a digital whiteboard, then you're into this tool, and then can you log into that and download that thing? Bringing all of that together into a very seamless experience that you could imagine you are sitting in a room together with a whiteboard and drawing things out, and people just having a little idea or making some notes somewhere. That stuff has to really improve. And I'm seeing new things coming into the market, but I don't think anybody's really nailed that all in one.
I agree.
And made something that really kind of transforms that experience and really makes you feel that way. I mean, we were talking about VR, perhaps you almost need that kind of feel, don't you? You want to feel like you're almost in the room. So I think that's the opportunity for the future, and I think that will support this hybrid model. But equally, I don't think anything replaces the feeling of being in the room together. And I think you said about the collaboration spaces, but I think the demands on businesses to provide a very appealing and attractive work environment are probably going to increase. So, our CFOs will have to put up with one of my teams is literally in a white room with grey chairs, that's not going to be good enough. Why would they bother coming? To sit in a long straight room with white walls and, grey tables and chairs. If we can make that office space really inviting, really appealing, lots going on, come in every Wednesday, we're going to have donuts in the morning and games in the afternoon. And I think we've got to do that kind of thing to get people in. And there's so much value you do get from getting people in, even if it's occasionally. I think that's where I'd rather put my money is, bringing people together for a really collaborative experience. But then when they're not together, making the hybrid experience or the virtual experience just feel as kind of natural as possible.
And that might take new roles. You might then have to hire a chief experience officer, a chief creative officer to design the experience of working for Experience or QA or London Business.
I think you're right, Peter, because I do think it's going to be a differentiator that we don't really talk enough about going forward in attracting talent to the organisation. What is the work experience like at home and in the office? We've had people saying, when I go to the office, the tech's different to what I use at home, and I'm not as productive as I can be. So trying to get that seamless experience, as you mentioned earlier, I think is going to be really important.
Absolutely,
And we've got just enough time for a final question, but I'll change it slightly because we have discussed collaboration early in the conversation. We discussed apprenticeships, working with partners. That's, I think, becoming more to the fore. But if there was one thing that you would advise fellow tech leaders to look for or seek out when thinking about how to approach their own organisation's structure, team, whether it's hybrid, remote or otherwise, what would your advice be? Kate, do you want to go first on that?
So the way that we're trying to look at it, again, internally, but also in terms of the services that we provide is jobs and roles have changed, I think, over the years, and they will continue to do so. So what we're trying to think about more is skills. So what are the skills we need? And whereas in the past you might have looked for a data scientist who knows all of this stuff and can also code in Python and can also do this and do that and manage some infrastructure, actually, could that be multiple people with some of those skills each that also do another job? So I think it's important to kind of think about the skills you need as an organisation rather than, well, I need 3 people who have that title that I believe, that title means they can do all these things, because perhaps that's not the case. Because if we've reskilled a finance analyst to be a data scientist, they might be brilliant at modelling, but they're not going to be the person who's going to worry about optimising code and making that code really performant. And perhaps you could get somebody who's a really skilled software engineer to do that part of the job. So I think that skills side is really the thing that we need to focus on. And that's where we've been looking at, my managers have been coming saying, I need this role. I'm saying, well, let's think about, do we really need to go to market and try and hire that role? Or can we just look at what the skills are and perhaps bring those in from across a number of people? And that might well be a more flexible way for us to get the skills and also give people opportunities to then grow and expand themselves into those roles over time.
Thank you.
I absolute build on Kate's point here is we're looking at the skills framework. We've adopted the Sophia framework as internally, and we've brought the tooling in to give that visibility across all of the organisation around what skills do our teams have, and also what technologies do they also have to complement those skills. And it really has helped us drive our technology strategy to start rationalising the amount of technologies that we use so we can actually start to build more fungible resource, so we can actually move it around the organisation a bit more freely. And then that allows people to use different learning platforms, and the teams have really embraced it. So they can see now that I can actually see a career path for me in the organisation, which we're hoping is a bit of a retainer.
I like it in the time.
Yeah, indeed.
But great for retention.
Really good for retention.
And Danny, finally, closing roundtable.
Finally, I think digital data skills need to be permeate across the entire organisation. Technology, as you say, needs to be simplified as much as possible and accessible. And we need to be creating these T-shaped people, so people who've got a broad set of skills, and they might be specialised in a particular area of business knowledge or data skills or financial skills, but ultimately they can turn their hand to X, Y, and Z. So you don't need to fill a room with 15 people to get a project off the ground. You could potentially do it with 5 people and call in a specialist if need be.
Far more efficient and adaptive. Well, thank you all for your time today. That's all we have time for, but fascinating conversation. I'm sure we can go on for far longer, and I'm sure we'll probably reprise this conversation shortly with new adaptions. But thank you very much for your time. And thank you for joining. This has been The Studio.